the man known to history as Muhammad Ali Jinnah was born Muhammad Ali Jinnah Bai in the port city of Karachi in modern-day Pakistan, then part of British India. He was born sometime in the mid-1870s. He later claimed to have been born on the 25th of December 1876, though this is unconfirmed, and birth certificates were not issued in Karachi until 1879. His school records indicate a birth date of the 20th of October 1875. His family belonged to the Khoja, a Shia Muslim community which lived in western India. His father, Jinnah Bai Punja, was born in the village of Paneli in Gujarat and moved to Karachi in 1875, where he would become a wealthy merchant. A year earlier, Jinnah Bai had married Mitibai, a Khoja from a neighbouring village. The couple would have 7 children, of whom Muhammad Ali, nicknamed Mamad, was the eldest. Although Mitibai would have a great influence on her son and encourage his education, very little is known about her life. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was born as a subject of the British Empire. The British had first arrived to India in the early 17th century as the English East India Company attempted to establish trading outposts in places like Kolkata to benefit from the extremely lucrative Asiatic trade. At that time, the Muslim Mughal Empire ruled over much of northern India, though most of its population remained Hindu, while a large number of sultanates and smaller kingdoms such as Mysore and Bengal were found further south and to the east. As the Mughals gradually declined, the British and other European colonial powers extracted further commercial concessions and strengthened their position in India. Following the East India Company's victory over the Nawab of Bengal and his French allies at the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the company set up administrative institutions known as presidencies that exercised de facto control over much of India. The British government gradually increased its control of the company's activities and revenues, and by the first half of the 19th century, India had largely become a British colony, a situation which was cemented after the Great Indian Rebellion of 1857, following which the British government nationalised the East India Company in 1858, setting up a colonial government known as the British Raj. The administrative overhaul resulted in the abolition of the Mughal Empire, though hundreds of princely states remained nominally independent. Throughout all of this, the British kept expanding, particularly so into the Punjab and what is now Pakistan, while also unsuccessfully trying to acquire control over Afghanistan. During the late 1870s, Jinnah Bai had become a prosperous merchant and banker and could afford to hire a private tutor when Mamad was around 6 years old. This arrangement lasted until 1887, when Mamad's paternal aunt, Manbai, visited from Bombay, modern-day Mumbai. The young boy was entranced by stories of the great trading hub on India's west coast and accompanied his aunt when she returned home. He enrolled in a primary school in Bombay, but he would only stay for 6 months until he was called back to Karachi by his mother. Back home, Mamad was sent to school at the Sindh Madrasa Tul Islam in December 1887. He was never a diligent student and preferred to skip class and go out riding on his father's horses. After some 3 years, his frequent absences caused him to be withdrawn from the madrasa, and he was sent to the prestigious Christian mission school, where he spent less than a year. As Jinnah Bai pondered what to do about his restless son, in 1892, his business associate Sir Frederick Lee Croft, the general manager of Douglas Graham and Company in Karachi, proposed sending the young boy to the main office in London as an apprentice. While Jinnah Bai saw this as a good opportunity, Mitabai was distraught at the prospect of a lengthy separation from her son. But when the teenager insisted on going to London, his mother dropped her objection on the condition that he marry a good Indian girl before his departure. Hence, in late 1892, the 16-year-old Muhammad Ali married Emibai, a 14-year-old cousin from Parnelli, chosen by his mother. A few days later, he left for England, never to see his mother or his young wife again. In April 1893, a few months after his arrival in London, Jinnah abandoned his apprenticeship at Graham's and instead sought to pursue a legal career by studying at Lincoln's Inn, one of the 4 inns of court where aspiring barristers receive their training in Britain. At around this time, he began to experiment with various renderings of his name to make it easier to pronounce for a British audience. He eventually adopted Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the name he would forevermore be known by. Over the next 3 years, Jinnah's legal education at Lincoln's Inn consisted of him studying with a barrister in chambers and shadowing him in court, while dinners in the Great Hall also gave him many opportunities to discuss legal issues with distinguished lawyers. Jinnah may have regarded his legal training as a stepping stone to a career in politics, inspired by the example of Dadabhai Naoroji, the Indian political leader who had been elected to the British House of Commons in July 1892 as a Member of Parliament for the Liberal Party. Aside from his legal studies, Jinnah frequented the British Museum's reading room and listened to political speeches in Hyde Park. However, the greatest attraction for him was the theatre, where he developed a lifelong passion for the works of William Shakespeare. He was only prevented from accepting an acting contract at a theatre company when he received a stern letter from his father accusing him of betraying the family if he were to accept such a role. After obtaining a certificate to practice law on the 11th of May 1896, Jinnah returned to India, joining his aunt Manbai in Bombay, where he quickly began practicing as a lawyer. Much had changed family-wise in his absence. His wife and mother had both died, and his father's business fortunes had declined. Jinnah's own legal practice was limited for several years, but in 1900 he began working for Bombay's acting Advocate General, John Molesworth Macpherson. Within a few months, he was appointed Third Presidency Magistrate of Bombay. At roughly 25 years of age, Jinnah had risen to hold one of the most prestigious offices in the city's court system. Alongside his promising legal career, Jinnah began playing an increasingly active role in politics. Back in 1897, he joined the Anjuman-e-Islam, one of the leading Muslim representative bodies in British India. The organization was led by Badruddin Tyabji, a Bombay High Court judge who became Jinnah's political mentor. Unlike the majority of India's Muslims, who were Orthodox Sunni, Tyabji and Jinnah paid little attention to religious distinctions and were well acquainted with both Hindus and Christians, as well as Parsis, a Zoroastrian community whose members included Naoroji. Despite the opposition of Muslim leaders such as Syed Ahmad Khan, who considered India's Muslims and Hindus separate nationalities and believed that the interests of Muslims would be drowned out by the Hindu majority in a future independent India, Tyabji had been a founding member of the Indian National Congress and served as its president in 1887 and 1888. In December 1904, Jinnah attended the Indian National Congress's annual conference for the first time and was assigned to a mission to lobby the British government alongside the Hindu leader Gopal Krishna Gokhale, though in the event Jinnah remained in Bombay as the Indian National Congress did not release the funds for him to travel. The issue of separate representation for Indian Muslims came to a head in July 1905, when Lord Curzon, the powerful Viceroy of India, opted to partition the presidency of Bengal in eastern India, which included what is now Bangladesh, along religious lines. While the decision appalled the Hindus in the Indian National Congress, it galvanized Muslim leaders to establish the Muslim League in Dhaka in December 1906. The League believed that their interests would be protected by the British authorities and were wary about an independent India. In the meantime, the Indian National Congress was meeting in nearby Kolkata under the presidency of Nauroji. Jinnah served as secretary to Nauroji and wrote parts of his speech, which not only called for Swaraj or self-government, but also promoted Hindu-Muslim unity. However, by the time National Congress members met at Surat in Gujarat for the 1907 session, a split opened up between the moderates represented by Nauroji and Jinnah, who supported self-government within the British Empire, and the faction led by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who demanded full independence. When Tilak was arrested in 1908, following a British crackdown, Jinnah agreed to defend him at his trial. Although he lost the case, he earned the admiration of a political opponent and bolstered his own profile. In 1909, the size of the Imperial Legislative Council was expanded to 60 members, of whom 27 were to be elected, including 6 seats reserved for Muslims. Jinnah was elected to the Legislative Council in 1910 as Bombay's Muslim representative. As a member of the Legislative Council in Kolkata, in March 1911, Jinnah introduced a bill that would become the Waqf Validation Act, a measure that recognized tax-free Muslim religious endowments as the equivalent of British trusts. Jinnah's work received the approval of the Muslim League, and he agreed to join the organization in 1913 while remaining committed to Hindu-Muslim unity. The League had moved towards self-government after the newly enthroned King George V announced in December 1911 that the partition of Bengal was to be reversed. At the same time, the British government in India was to move from Kolkata to a newly built city near Delhi, the former capital of the Mughal Empire and still a major Muslim centre in northern India. This decision to build a new planned administrative capital near Old Delhi is where the term New Delhi comes from. In April 1913, Jinnah and Gokhale went to London to promote the cause of Hindu-Muslim unity before returning in September. Jinnah was chosen to lead another delegation to London the following year, but the outbreak of the First World War in August 1914 caused Indian affairs to fall off the agenda for the British government. During his time in London, Jinnah met Mohandas Gandhi, better known today by the honorific title Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian lawyer who had been leading a campaign of non-violent resistance to British rule in South Africa for 2 decades. Gandhi was now planning to return to India to rally Indians behind the British war effort. By the time he returned to India in early 1915, Jinnah found himself increasingly politically isolated following the death of Gokhale in February 1915, while the ailing Nauroji remained in London for the final 2 years of his life. Jinnah laboured hard, not only to heal the split in the Indian National Congress between the moderates and the radicals, but to bring together its members and those of the Muslim League under a joint platform. In December 1915, the Congress and the League both met in Bombay, facilitating Jinnah's bridge-building efforts. On New Year's Day 1916, Jinnah successfully moved a resolution to create a committee to develop a joint political program between the two organizations. The Indian National Congress had set up its own committee on a similar basis under the leadership of Motilal Nehru, who admired Jinnah as one of the few Muslim leaders advocating interreligious unity in the Raj, rather than further stoking divisions between Muslims and Hindus. After meetings with Nehru in the spring, Jinnah spent 2 summer months in Darjeeling in northern India as a guest of his friend and client Sadinshaw Manekji Petit, one of the wealthiest Parsis in Bombay. By now in his early 40s, Jinnah was infatuated with Petit's daughter Ratambai, nicknamed Rati, an intelligent and gifted 16-year-old girl with literary and political interests. He would soon seek to marry her. In November 1916, Jinnah had met with Congress President Ambika Charan Mazumdar in Kolkata to agree to representation quotas for Muslims and other religious minorities in regional legislative councils. Their agreement formed the basis of the Lucknow Pact, which Jinnah steered through the Muslim League, while Mazumdar secured agreement at a meeting of the Indian National Congress attended by 2,300 delegates. Jinnah exploited the sense of optimism about interfaith unity by asking Sadinshaw Petit for his views on interfaith marriages. When Sadinshaw enthusiastically endorsed interfaith marriage as a means to strengthen the national cause, Jinnah revealed his intention to marry his daughter Rati. While Sadinshaw was outraged and raised various legal objections to such a match, Jinnah and Rati ignored his objections and planned to marry after the latter's 18th birthday. On the political front, Jinnah's optimism appeared justified after the radical liberal politician Edwin Montagu was appointed Secretary of State for India in London in the summer of 1917. In August, Montagu announced that the British government supported the, quote, gradual development of self-governing institutions in India. When he visited India that winter, he was impressed by Jinnah's advocacy for self-government. Montagu attended a meeting of the Indian National Congress in Kolkata, where Jinnah moved a resolution urging implementation of the Lucknow Pact reforms, before doing the same a few days later at the Muslim League. Fresh from these successes, on the 19th of April 1918, Jinnah married Rati in Bombay. Within a few days, the couple travelled to Delhi, where a conference was due to be held on the issue of mobilizing further Indian resources for the war. During the war conference, Jinnah led opposition to the British recruitment drive in India, arguing that greater self-determination had to be promised by the British for India in return. He was surprised to see Gandhi offer his support to the government's resolution for more Indian troops. Meanwhile, Montagu published his proposals for constitutional reform in India, recommending greater powers for legislative bodies. Jinnah served on a joint Congress-League committee, responding to the proposals, and broadly welcomed Montagu's report. Then, the First World War came to an end in November 1918. The Indian nationalist leaders argued that Montagu's proposed reforms should now be initiated and that the Raj should soon receive dominion status, a level of autonomy enjoyed by other British colonies like Canada and Australia. Instead, they were surprised when a government anti-sedition committee, chaired by Sir Sidney Rowlatt, recommended the indefinite extension of wartime emergency measures in India. Following the passage of the Rowlatt Act in March 1919, Jinnah resigned from his position on the Congress League Committee while Gandhi launched a nationwide civil disobedience campaign in April. A week later, a demonstration in the city of Amritsar in the Punjab turned violent and resulted in the massacre of at least 400 Indians, with a further 1,500 wounded. By that time, Jinnah was on his way to London to persuade the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George to allow an Indian Muslim delegation to attend the Paris Peace Conference. While Jinnah's appeals fell on deaf ears, he had cause for celebration as Rati gave birth to a daughter named Dina while they were in London on the 15th of August 1919. She would be Jinnah's only child. Jinnah remained optimistic about the prospect of political reform following his return to India, but the Government of India Act of December 1919 simply involved a watered-down version of Montagu's proposed reforms, ones which instituted a system of power-sharing or diarchy between Indians and the British authorities at the provincial level. While Jinnah railed against British broken promises, Gandhi's program of civil disobedience gained momentum amongst the members of the Indian National Congress and the wider public. When the National Congress met in Nagpur in central India in December 1920, Gandhi's resolution calling the people of India to campaign for Swaraj, the Indian name for self-rule or devolved government, through civil disobedience, met with enthusiastic support. Jinnah was opposed to Gandhi's approach, and, feeling disillusioned with the drift of Indian politics, he resigned from the National Congress and returned to Bombay, where he channeled his energies into his legal work for the next several years. He would only gradually return to national politics from 1922 onwards. In September 1923, he stood successfully as an independent Muslim candidate for Bombay and was elected to the Central Legislative Assembly, the body created by the Montagu reforms as the lower house of a bicameral legislature. When the new parliamentary session opened in New Delhi in January 1924, Jinnah formed a bloc of independents and offered to cooperate with the Swaraj Party, a faction of Congress led by Chittaranjan Das and Motilal Nehru, that had lost faith in Gandhi's leadership. In 1925, Jinnah was recommended for a knighthood by the departing Viceroy Lord Reading, but refused the honour by saying, quote, "I prefer to remain plain Mr. Jinnah." As Jinnah approached his 50s, he and Rati began to drift further apart. Rati became increasingly ill and turned to spiritualism for consolation, while Jinnah drew closer to Muslim conservatives to consolidate his political base. Jinnah recognized that all was not well with Rati and hoped that an extended trip to Europe and North America in the spring and summer of 1926 would revive their relationship. But Rati's health deteriorated further, and by 1927 they were spending long periods apart as she battled with what seems to have been a severe case of clinical depression, as well as undiagnosed cancer, possibly of the bowel. The separation from his wife and his declining political fortunes caused Jinnah's own health to worsen, and as a lifelong smoker, he would suffer from lung problems for the rest of his life. In 1927, the Conservative Secretary of State for India, Lord Birkenhead, appointed the Liberal Sir John Simon to head a commission to review constitutional arrangements in India. Despite objections from the new Viceroy, Lord Irwin, later Lord Halifax, none of the commission's 7 members were Indians. In December 1927, upon being re-elected President of the Muslim League for 3 years, Jinnah announced that a, quote, "constitutional war has been declared on Great Britain," and joined Gandhi and Nehru in refusing to cooperate with the Simon Commission. After organizing a boycott against the Simon Commission in Bombay, in February 1928, Jinnah attended an all-party conference of Indian political leaders to formulate alternative constitutional proposals, one which unfortunately ended without any agreement on the Muslim question. Following this latest political setback, Jinnah travelled to Britain to call on political friends among the English political establishment, while the Indian National Congress appointed Motilal Nehru to chair a constitutional reform commission. Although Motilal and his son Jawaharlal's proposals did not include any safeguards for Muslim representation, a young protege of Jinnah, Muhammad Ali Karim Chagla, accepted the Nehru report on behalf of the Muslim League. When he returned to Bombay, Jinnah was furious with what it contained. On the 28th of December, Jinnah presented the Muslim League's case to the Indian National Congress that in any future self-governed India, 1/3 of the seats in the central legislature should be reserved for Muslims. The Hindu leader M.R. Jayakar, the deputy leader of the Swaraj Party, dismissed Jinnah's arguments by claiming that many Muslims supported Nehru's proposals and that Jinnah represented only a minority among the Muslims. In a desperate plea for unity, Jinnah responded, "We have to work together, and whatever our differences may be, let us at any rate not create more bad blood. If we cannot agree, let us at any rate agree to differ, but let us part as friends." Jinnah's speech proved a pivotal moment in his career, marking the beginning of the end of his efforts to achieve Indian self-government through a united front of Muslims and Hindus. He left Kolkata before the end of 1928 and arrived in Agra on New Year's Day 1929 to attend the meeting of the All-Parties Muslim Conference chaired by the Aga Khan, the leader of the Nizari Ismaili Shia community which Jinnah had broken away from earlier in his life. The Aga Khan enthusiastically welcomed Jinnah to the conference, which adopted a manifesto calling for a federal constitution with complete autonomy for the provinces. This would ensure that Muslim-dominated parts of the Raj in the northwest and northeast would have significant independence from a Hindu-majority legislature in New Delhi. After returning to Bombay in mid-January, Jinnah learned that Rati was seriously ill and visited her daily at the Taj Hotel, where she had moved to live on her own. She died there on the 20th of February, 1929, her 29th birthday. At her funeral 2 days later, Jinnah broke down in tears as her body was lowered into her grave. While it was almost certainly cancer that killed her, exactly what might have ailed her psychologically in her final years remains unclear. In late March 1929, Jinnah attended the legislature in New Delhi, where he rallied opposition to the Nehru report. In order to demonstrate he was not in a minority position amongst the Raj's Muslim community, he convened a meeting of the Muslim League on the 30th of March and worked to develop a program of 14 points as a statement of the Muslim position. However, he did not get a chance to present his motion before the meeting descended into chaos. As his political base melted away, Jinnah had no choice but to turn to London, where Labour Party leader Ramsay MacDonald had become Prime Minister for a second time in June 1929. In a letter to MacDonald, Jinnah urged the British Prime Minister to grant India Dominion status in response to increasingly vocal calls for full Indian independence. Prior to this, Jinnah pleaded his case in a lengthy meeting with the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, who was returning to London to receive new instructions. Jinnah was delighted when he received a letter from MacDonald in August declaring the government's intention to offer Dominion status. At Jinnah's recommendation, the Viceroy announced a round-table conference, bringing together prominent Indian political leaders to ascertain their views on the Hindu-Muslim question. 2 days before Christmas 1929, Jinnah, Gandhi and Motilal met Irwin in New Delhi, where they declared that they desired immediate dominion status without further conferences. On the 6th of April 1930, Gandhi launched another national civil disobedience campaign after he walked 240 miles to the sea to make salt as a protest against the government's salt monopoly. He was then imprisoned, but continued his political activities from jail. Meanwhile, the Indian National Congress had initiated a boycott of the Round Table Conference. Jinnah did not agree with this approach and attended the conference in London, which began on the 12th of November 1930 and ran through to January 1931. The delegates failed to come to an agreement on the Hindu-Muslim issue, while the British government was always glad to exploit the religious divisions of the Raj as a reason for not accelerating the devolution of powers in India. 2 further round-table conferences would follow, in 1931 and 1932, one of which was attended by Gandhi, while the third was virtually ignored by the Indian leaders, Jinnah included, as all sides lost faith in the possibility of anything meaningful being achieved. In the meantime, the Muslim League met in Allahabad in December under the leadership of Dr. Muhammad Iqbal, a Punjabi lawyer whom Jinnah had invited to take over in his absence. Iqbal announced that, "I would like to see the Punjab, the northwest frontier province, Sindh and Balochistan amalgamated into a single state. The formation of a consolidated northwest Indian Muslim state appears to me to be the final destiny of the Muslims, at least of northwest India." Clearly, there was a distinct shift now amongst the Muslim leaders in India towards the idea of a separate Muslim state being created in the northwest of the Raj. Jinnah spent some time in England after the failure of the Round Table conferences, building up a successful legal practice in London. While he was there in 1933, a Cambridge student named Chaudhry Rahmat Ali proposed a scheme for the creation of a separate Muslim nation in a pamphlet he composed entitled Now or Never. He proposed that the new Muslim country would be named Pakistan. This is an abbreviation of the names of the 5 provinces of northwestern India: Punjab, the Afghan northwest frontier, Kashmir, Sindh and Balochistan, while Pak means pure in Persian and Stan is the Pashto word for land. So Pakistan also transliterates as the land of the pure. Although the Pakistan proposal was debated in Parliament, Jinnah did not actively engage with it and refused Rahmat Ali's requests to meet. Instead, he answered appeals by fellow lawyer Liaquat Ali Khan to revive the Muslim League by returning to India in the spring of 1934, where he also rallied opposition to Britain's latest proposals for constitutional reform, which envisaged the creation of an Indian federation with executive authority remaining with a powerful Governor-General appointed by the British Crown. Although Jinnah successfully organised the New Delhi Assembly to vote against the reforms, this had no impact on the legislative process in London, and most of the measures were enacted in the Government of India Act of 1935. Jinnah spent the next 2 years balancing the demands of his legal practice in London and his political activities in India, constantly manoeuvring his small bloc of independents between the British and the Indian National Congress to secure the best possible deal for Indian Muslims, an approach that earned him a reputation for being untrustworthy. In a quest to position himself as the sole spokesman of the Muslim cause, Jinnah worked to bring other Muslim leaders into the Muslim League. In the provincial elections of 1937, the Indian National Congress won 716 out of the 1,585 seats across the 11 provinces, while the Muslim League secured 109. Recognizing that the Indian National Congress had only returned 26 Muslim candidates, Jawaharlal Nehru sought to recruit Muslims to his cause by presenting the Congress as the legitimate party of all India and painting Jinnah's Muslim League as out of touch with the Muslim masses. This further galvanized Jinnah to mobilize the grassroots and to unify powerful Muslim blocs under the Muslim League's banner. In October 1937, a landmark agreement was forged in Lucknow between Jinnah and Sir Sikandar Hayat Khan, the Premier of the Punjab, the most populous and prosperous of the provinces in northwestern India. To reflect his new identity as the leader of India's Muslims, Jinnah exchanged his formal Savile suit for traditional Punjabi attire and a black karakol hat made from sheep's wool, which came to be known as the Jinnah cap. Between 1937 and 1940, Jinnah transformed the League into a mass movement within the British Raj, as membership numbers increased from a few thousand to over 500,000, and the party came to be seen as the natural political party for the Muslims of British India, particularly in the northwest of the Raj. Although Nehru was by now extending an olive branch, and Jinnah met Gandhi for talks in Bombay in April 1938, Jinnah stood firm, refusing to make any concessions that would undermine his efforts to portray the Indian Congress as a Hindu organization. While Nehru lobbied the opposition Labour Party in London for an all-India federation, Jinnah offered to support the ruling Conservative government's policy on India in return for a separate Muslim state in the northwest. As the Muslim League met in Patna in December 1938, the welcoming crowds bestowed the honorific title of Qaid-e-Azam, or Great Leader, upon Jinnah. In his address to the Muslim League, Jinnah blamed Gandhi for betraying the founding principles of the Indian National Congress and transforming it into a Hindu organization. The League also accused the Congress of perpetrating atrocities against Muslims in Hindu-majority areas, claiming that Hindus were attacking and killing Muslims during religious festivals. Jinnah was frustrated by the lack of concern by the British and threatened to withdraw his support for the British government's policies. In early September 1939, news arrived to India of Germany's invasion of Poland and Britain's entry into the Second World War. While Gandhi signalled his personal sympathies with the British and Nehru denounced the fascism of Germany and the countries that would soon join with it in the war, Italy and Japan, the Indian National Congress refused to support the British in the war effort to restore the status quo, and instead opted for non-cooperation, the party resigning its provincial ministries in the process. Troubled by Congress's non-cooperation policy, in January 1940, Viceroy Lord Linlithgow announced the government's intention to offer Dominion status and to open up his Executive Council to Indian representation. The British position became even more conciliatory months later when the Nazis conquered most of continental Europe, leaving Britain isolated in its war against Germany and badly in need of any and all support it could obtain from India and the Commonwealth countries like Australia and Canada. Yet India too would soon feel the impact of the war once the Japanese began their attacks on both the US and British in December 1941, with the Japanese Empire soon extending into Burma and threatening to capture Kolkata with a campaign into India. Though he was battling ill health and was, by that time, a man in his mid-60s, one who was slowing down after years of frontline politics, travelling between the different cities of a vast country and between India and Britain, on the 22nd of March 1940, Jinnah opened a meeting of the Muslim League in the Punjabi capital of Lahore, where he declared that Indian Muslims were a separate nationality and that the issue of Hindu-Muslim relations in India was of an international character, a complete reversal of his former position that Muslims and Hindus could coexist within one country in a post-independence India. The following day, the League adopted a resolution stating that, quote, "The areas in which the Muslims are numerically in a majority, as in the northwestern and eastern zones of India, should be grouped to constitute independent states in which the constituent units should be autonomous and sovereign." Although the Lahore resolution did not clarify whether the northwestern and eastern zones should be two separate countries or part of the same state, Jinnah confirmed that they would constitute a single independent state. Congress was sufficiently concerned about its position among Muslims and appointed the Muslim Maulana Azad as its president. In June 1940, Jinnah secured an undertaking from Linlithgow that the British government would not adopt a constitution for India without the approval of the leaders of the Muslim community of the Raj, by which he meant himself. While Gandhi was calling for an end to hostilities in the Second World War, Jinnah decided not to push too hard on Indian issues while Britain was still at war, and recommended that the Viceroy expand his executive council to include Muslim voices on at least equal footing with Hindus. When Gandhi and Nehru's opposition to the war saw them return to prison, Jinnah wasted no opportunity in reminding the British authorities of Muslim loyalty to the war effort. Jinnah was now fully committed to the cause of an independent Muslim country, which most had now accepted should be called Pakistan, in line with Rahmat Ali's proposal back in 1933. But there was much work to do in producing practical proposals for what the new state would look like. In February 1941, Shahnawaz Khan, the Nawab of Mamdot in the Punjab, drew up a memo entitled "What is Pakistan?", in which he offered a demographic analysis of Muslim and Hindu populations in the northwestern and northeastern states of India and recommended the exclusion of certain territories home to large Hindu and Sikh populations to ensure a stable Muslim majority for the new state, though he did suggest the Muslim state should include Kolkata in Bengal, which was a primarily Hindu city, but a major economic hub within Muslim-majority Bengal. On the 20th of July 1941, Jinnah was infuriated to learn that Linlithgow had extended invitations to the Executive Council to several Muslim leaders including Sikandar and Fazlul Haq, the Premier of Bengal, but not Jinnah himself. Regarding this as a challenge to his authority within the Muslim community, Jinnah responded by forcing Sikandar to resign from the Council of the Muslim League, but Fazlul proved more stubborn and criticized Jinnah's leadership, resulting in his expulsion from the League. In the meantime, Japan's attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor in December 1941, followed by a major offensive in Southeast Asia, caused British authorities in London and New Delhi to fear a Japanese invasion of India. Linlithgow proposed releasing Congress leaders from jail and offering concessions to get Congress to participate in a wartime government. Despite his own reservations, the British wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill agreed to send Labour politician Sir Stafford Cripps, recently appointed to his war cabinet, as an envoy to India. The fall of Singapore to Japan in February 1942 increased the sense of urgency. Cripps arrived in India at the end of March. Jinnah was pleasantly surprised by his proposals, which stated that a group of, quote, dissident provinces from within the Raj that were minded to form their own separate dominion were free to do so during the process of granting independence to British India as a whole, whether on a permanent basis or to join India at a later stage. This was giving the green light for the creation of an independent Muslim-dominated Pakistan. Cripps' proposals were understandably opposed by the Indian National Congress, which returned to civil disobedience. Linlithgow moved to arrest Gandhi and the other leaders again in August. Jinnah used the opportunity to denounce Congress's rebellion, and violent clashes soon broke out, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of civilians. At a time when the British Empire was struggling to resist Japanese advances in neighbouring Burma, the Indian Army was preoccupied with maintaining order within India. In 1943, British prospects in the war appeared brighter, following victory over the Germans in North Africa. But Bengal faced the prospect of Japanese invasion and a deadly famine that would claim an estimated 3 million lives. The perception that the British government had not done enough to try and prevent or stop the famine further fueled popular demand within India for independence once the war was over. Fazlul Huq's provincial administration fell in March 1943 and was replaced by a ministry led by the Muslim League. A confident Jinnah addressed the League's meeting at New Delhi in April, claiming to have the support of 99% of India's 100 million Muslims, and urged his supporters to prepare to fight for Pakistan's independence following the conclusion of the war. As the year progressed and the famine in Bengal showed no signs of abating, Jinnah was obliged to defend the Muslim League's government and his own cooperation with the British colonial apparatus, arguing that the new provincial administration was doing its best to limit the damage caused by the famine and the other deprivations brought on by the war. In October of that year, he called on the new Viceroy, Field Marshal Archibald Wavell, to provide relief to the affected areas, and blamed the British government for failing to act. But Wavell was ill-disposed towards Jinnah and believed that he was acting like a dictator in his control of the Muslim League and his manipulation of the colonial government, while the Indian National Congress was refusing to participate in it. When he attended the opening session of the Legislative Assembly in New Delhi in February 1944, Jinnah was appalled to hear Wavell emphasize the geographical unity of India and intensified his attacks on the Viceroy. Wavell was more inclined to seek a meeting with Gandhi, whose health had collapsed in prison, prompting the Viceroy to recommend his release from prison in May. The air of freedom restored Gandhi's health, who announced his intention to negotiate with Jinnah. In September 1944, Gandhi and Jinnah held 2 weeks of talks at the latter's house in Bombay, but neither was prepared to give ground. While Gandhi proposed holding plebiscites on the future of the Muslim-majority provinces after India's independence, Jinnah insisted on partition before independence. With talks floundering in late September, Gandhi wrote to Jinnah to say, quote, "Let it be a partition between two brothers. If a division, there must be." But the latter doubted Gandhi's sincerity, indicating that he was never inclined to accept any formal deal with the Indian National Congress at a time when the Muslim League was making political capital out of attacking Gandhi's party. Disappointed at the failure of the talks, Wavell met Jinnah in December, where the latter declared that India had never been a united nation, and the concept of a united India was invented by the British for administrative purposes in the 19th century. The Viceroy and other British officials were unconvinced by Jinnah's idea of Pakistan and found him unwilling to discuss specifics, observing that the proposed Eastern Pakistan would be economically unviable without Kolkata, an overwhelmingly Hindu city. In any case, most Bengali leaders, including the Muslim League's premier Khawaja Nazimuddin, envisaged sharing power with Hindus. Nevertheless, Wavell admitted that Pakistan had great sentimental appeal to the Muslims, and the government had not come up with a more appealing alternative. With both Gandhi and Jinnah in poor health at the beginning of 1945, an agreement was struck between Jinnah's right-hand man, Liaquat Ali Khan, and Vallabhbhai Desai, the Indian National Congress's majority leader of the Central Legislative Assembly, which envisaged an interim central government with both the Congress and the League each having 40% of the cabinet ministries. While neither Jinnah nor Gandhi seemed to be aware of these talks, the Liaquat Desai proposals were seriously considered by the British authorities in New Delhi and in London. On the 25th of June 1945, Wavell opened a conference at the summer capital of Simla in the foothills of the Himalayas, where Jinnah and Gandhi were among 22 Indian political leaders invited to discuss a power-sharing arrangement. Jinnah insisted that the Muslim League should have the exclusive right to appoint Muslim representatives on the Executive Council, and further demanded that any measure that the Muslims opposed could only pass with a two-thirds majority vote. These demands were unacceptable to both the Congress and the British, but served to strengthen Jinnah's popularity with his base. It was becoming clear at the same time that the Congress were opposed to Muslims having an equal say in the governance of a unified, independent India. Soon after the end of the Simla Conference, Churchill's Conservative government was defeated back in Britain in the July 1945 elections and replaced by Clement Attlee's Labour Party. In August, the new government endorsed Wavell's plans to hold winter elections to test Jinnah's claims to represent all Muslims. As Jinnah's campaign machine kicked into gear in late 1945, his position was vindicated when the League won all 30 of the Muslim seats to the Central Legislature in December, while the League won 88% of the Muslim vote in provincial elections in early 1946. A cabinet delegation led by Cripps arrived in March with two proposals: either a loose all-India union incorporating autonomous Hindu and Muslim states with defence and foreign affairs reserved for the central government, or the creation of two independent states, Hindustan and Pakistan, divided along religious lines. When Cripps warned Jinnah that a sovereign, independent Pakistan would not include Hindu and Sikh areas of the Punjab and Bengal, Jinnah suggested territorial claims could be resolved at a later stage. In May, Jinnah and Maulana Azad led 4-man teams to a summit in Simla to work out the details of an all-India union. While Cripps assured Jinnah that if the Indian National Congress refused to participate, he was prepared to turn over the whole government to the Muslim League, Wavell was not as keen on relinquishing his power on this basis. His reticence caused Jinnah to be more committed to an independent Pakistan. In July, the Muslim League's council adopted resolutions to withdraw its support of the cabinet delegation and announced a campaign of direct action. Throughout his career, Jinnah had sought to advance his political causes by legal and constitutional means. His change of heart had deadly consequences. On the 16th of August 1946, designated as Direct Action Day, the Muslims launched a nationwide riot. The bloodiest clashes took place in Kolkata, where thousands of Muslims and Hindus were killed over several days, while the British Army sheltered in its barracks. On the 24th of August, Wavell announced that Nehru and 13 Congress colleagues would form an interim government in early September. The Viceroy then worked to encourage Jinnah to join the government, and in October, the latter agreed to nominate 5 Muslim League members led by Liaquat Ali Khan. A new coalition was formally announced, and the Muslim League members were sworn in with Liaquat as finance minister. Amidst continued nationwide rioting, the coalition proved fragile, and Jinnah announced that the Muslim League would not participate in the Constituent Assembly. In December, Jinnah, Liaquat and Nehru were invited to London for talks as Wavell attempted to rescue the situation. Jinnah was more inclined to negotiate directly with the British government than to talk any further with the Indian National Congress or participate in a Constituent Assembly. But the London talks proved fruitless. When the Constituent Assembly convened in New Delhi on the 9th of December, the 79 seats reserved for the Muslim League remained empty. A few days later, Jinnah returned to his native Karachi. At around 70 years of age, he had less than 2 years left to live, but his greatest political battle was still to be won. In early 1947, the Attlee government recognized that Britain could no longer maintain control of India. On the 20th of February, the Prime Minister declared that the British would evacuate India by June 1948, calling on all parties to resolve their differences in preparation for independence. Attlee entrusted the transfer of power to Lord Louis Mountbatten, a charismatic admiral and a member of the royal family, who was appointed Viceroy. As the India debate began in the House of Commons on the 5th of March, opposition leader Winston Churchill criticised Attlee's deadline and argued that both parties would use this time to prepare for civil war. His warning was accompanied by the intensification of political violence in the Punjab region, where Sikandar's successor, Khizar Hayat Tiwana's coalition government, collapsed under pressure from the Muslim League. The Nawab of Mamdot's attempt to form a League-led coalition was opposed by a united Hindu-Sikh opposition, forcing the British governor, Sir Evan Jenkins, to assume direct rule. By March 1947, Nehru was prepared to concede the creation of Pakistan, while ensuring the Hindu and Sikh areas of the Punjab and Bengal remained within India. On the 24th of March, Mountbatten was sworn in as Viceroy, and over the following days he met with Congress and League leaders. The Viceroy was surprised by Gandhi's offer for Jinnah to take over the reins of the interim government to present his Pakistan proposals. As Prime Minister, Nehru vehemently opposed Gandhi's approach, and when Mountbatten met Jinnah on the 5th of April, he chose not to transmit the offer after Jinnah claimed he could not trust any of Congress's leaders. Mountbatten was frustrated by Jinnah's intransigence, though he too was frustrated by the prospect of partitioning the Punjab and Bengal, considering that this would be, quote, "the worst service I could do to India." In June, Jinnah reluctantly accepted Mountbatten's proposals, and the provincial assemblies in Bengal and Punjab voted for partition. In early July, the British lawyer Cyril Radcliffe was appointed to head a commission to determine the new boundaries in Bengal and Punjab. On the 18th of July 1947, King George VI gave royal assent to the Indian Independence Act, which provided for the creation of two independent dominions of India and Pakistan 4 weeks later. Both states would remain within the British Commonwealth, and while Nehru invited Mountbatten to remain as Governor-General of India, Jinnah insisted on becoming Governor-General of Pakistan. On the 7th of August, he left New Delhi for his native Karachi, the new capital of Pakistan. 4 days later, Jinnah delivered an address to the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan in which he promised religious freedom for the country's Hindu community and other minorities such as the Sikhs. He also expressed the wish that Muslims and Hindus would work together to forge a new nation, now that partition had been settled upon. Despite these optimistic words, and a ceremony on the 14th of August marking the transfer of power from Mountbatten to Jinnah, religious violence broke out on the 17th of August after the Radcliffe Commission's proposals were made public. While Jinnah was pleased to note the relative tranquility in Karachi, the Punjabi capital of Lahore struggled to cope with the influx of refugees fleeing Sikh persecution. Despite his failing health, Jinnah visited Lahore and led efforts to provide aid. As Jinnah appealed for British assistance in the Punjab, the Hindu Maharaja of Muslim-majority Jammu and Kashmir hoped to remain independent instead of joining India or Pakistan. This prompted an uprising from the Muslim tribes against the Maharaja, and in October, Pakistani irregulars crossed into Kashmir to support the rebels. In response, the Maharaja acceded to India and Nehru airlifted troops into Srinagar, Kashmir's largest city, on the morning of the 27th of October. Jinnah gave orders for the Pakistani army to move into Kashmir, but the Pakistani army's British commander, Sir Douglas Gracey, refused to entertain the prospect of two Commonwealth armies fighting each other, and Jinnah was persuaded to withdraw his orders. Hostilities, nevertheless, continued in Jammu and Kashmir, and the issue was eventually brought to the United Nations, which brokered a ceasefire by the end of the year, but was unable to hold a statewide plebiscite. Meanwhile, millions of Muslims and Hindus began migrating between the two new nations, Muslims from India to Pakistan, to avoid living under a Hindu-dominated government, and Hindus in the other direction. Events in Punjab and Kashmir convinced Jinnah that India was determined to bring about Pakistan's collapse and reintegration into India. Nehru was slow to provide the 1/6 of India's pre-partition assets that Pakistan was entitled to, and Jinnah had to rely on a loan from the Nizam of Hyderabad to keep Pakistan alive. Jinnah found an unlikely ally in Mahatma Gandhi, who went on hunger strike in an attempt to stop the killings and persuade the Indian government to meet its obligations. While his campaign was successful, Gandhi was seen by Hindu extremists as a Muslim sympathizer, and he was assassinated on the 29th of January 1948. In his message of condolence, Jinnah described Gandhi as, quote, one of the greatest men produced by the Hindu community. There was still much to do to consolidate the Pakistani state and foster its economic development, but Jinnah was mortally ill with both tuberculosis and lung cancer. He nevertheless made his first ever visit to Dhaka, the capital of East Pakistan, where on the 21st of March he delivered an address in English to a crowd of 300,000 Bengali speakers to promote the unity of West Pakistan and East Pakistan, asserting that Urdu was to be the sole national language. In the event, East Pakistan retained its linguistic identity, and in 1971 would gain its independence as the nation-state of Bangladesh, the geographical division between the two nations being impossible to overcome after independence. In June 1948, Jinnah and his sister Fatima went to Quetta in Balochistan, where the cleaner air appeared to restore his health. He returned to Karachi and coughed his way through a speech at the opening of the State Bank of Pakistan on the 1st of July, before returning to Quetta a few days later. He soon retreated even higher up the mountains to Ziyarat, where several leading doctors were summoned to offer a diagnosis. Those who attended him were shocked by his emaciated body and concluded that he did not have long to live. The thin mountain air of Ziyarat was doing Jinnah no good, and in mid-August he was taken back to Quetta. Though his doctors advised him to return to Karachi as soon as possible, Jinnah was unwilling to do so as a sick man, and vowed only to return when he could walk through the gates of his Governor-General's mansion. However, as his condition continued to worsen, he was taken by plane to Karachi in the afternoon of the 11th of September and transferred to an army ambulance. The ambulance ran out of fuel, and it was not until 6 p.m. that the party arrived at the governor's mansion. Later that evening, Muhammad Ali Jinnah collapsed and died. He was in his early 70s, probably 71 or 72. The following day, he was buried in central Karachi, where a domed mausoleum was built for him during the 1960s. He was succeeded as Governor-General by Liaquat Ali Khan, who served for 3 years until his assassination in October 1951. Muhammad Ali Jinnah continues to be revered in Pakistan as the Qaid-e-Azam, the founding father of the nation. However, for much of his career, he had been the leader of a moderate party in Muslim eyes, seeking self-government for a united India where Hindus and Muslims would live together in harmony. Ultimately, despite striving towards this goal for decades, the dismantling of the British Raj in 1947 was so badly prepared for and planned, both by the political parties within India and by the British government, that it led to the creation of India and Pakistan as separate Hindu and Muslim countries. Relations between the two nations have remained poor ever since, with numerous limited border wars fought since 1947 between what, since the 1900s, have been two nuclear-armed nations. Although he failed to realize his dream of a united India in his negotiations with his fellow political titans Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi, Jinnah was able to assert himself as the leader of India's Muslim community, negotiating with the British authorities and the Indian National Congress to secure the best terms for the people he represented. Having suffered repeated setbacks during his political career, near the end of his life, Jinnah was able to celebrate a great political victory as the founding Governor-General of an independent Pakistan. What do you think of Muhammad Ali Jinnah? Was he a political leader who defended the post-independence rights of Indian Muslims by successfully campaigning for the creation of Pakistan? Or should he be remembered for his valiant but ultimately unsuccessful attempts to forge a Hindu-Muslim alliance that would have been watching?